Well, hello there. Yes, bit of a wet weekend. Never mind, it's the weekend. Hooray! Yes, just today I just wanted to show you a couple of clips from some new culture forum videos, one of which is sort of shared with Talk TV. I don't know, it just, I think, sort of encapsulates the absolute paucity of thought and, to a certain extent, the kind of general amnesia there is on the right about any form of real thought, reality, history, other things. Let's go into the first clip, which is Peter Whittle talking to Mike Graham. Let's dive into that.
And are you finding that more and more people are coming to you to see what you're about and what your points of view are? Because Peter Hitchens talks about this, that this is a sort of, people talk about long COVID, I talk about long Blair. This is Tony Blair who set up all of this kind of, culture war scenario. And it's now sort of playing out because all the people that were children during Tony Blair's reign have now been through school, they've probably been through university, and now they're presenting themselves in the civil service, in our banking institutions, in all sorts of what you might call establishment jobs. But they've all become very left-wing.
Exactly. Well, I think the level of indoctrination through education and universities has been so high for so long. So, as you said, they're now in HR departments, these people, are often on very, very spurious degrees, but they've all been kind of really indoctrinated with these general beliefs. That's why they all seem to think the same thing about everything. We were discussing a bit earlier.
Yes, and not only do they seem to think the same thing, but they are kind of frightened to differ from the status quo, and the status quo has massively moved. When I was young, the civil service was seen, generally speaking, as a kind of Sir Humphrey type figure, small c conservative, but very reliable. Now we've got people writing pronouns on their emails, saying that we must have diversity and inclusion, don't actually do any jobs, don't even go to the office, work from home. I mean, it's incredible switch around in sort of 20 years.
It's extraordinary. In fact, I think one of the big watersheds, you mentioned Blair there, without question, 50%, over 50% of kids going to university, that's made a big difference to their general political outlook. But also, you've got a situation where, for exple, it was under Blair that there's been this massive demographic change that came in, basically. It was really turbocharged by Blair. But also, it's the general creep through all of our institutions, which is now gradually coming to light. We've seen it, with the banks and with Nigel. He hasn't stumbled on it, but it's almost like he stumbled on something.
Yes, well, there you have it, the dreadful groupthink that's going on. Now, just to unpack some of that stuff, I mean, it's just illiterate, right? Okay, in terms of any kind of historical reality. Now, Archibald Michael Graham, shouldn't really call him Archibald, but I just think it fits him better. But there we go. Dropped out of university, so that's presumably the reason why he wasn't indoctrinated, even though he was pre-Blair. Peter Whittle is a couple of years older than me. He went to Bath and did history and politics, although that didn't radicalise him because it was pre-Blair, whereas I did my degree back in 85 to 89. Which is also pre-Blair. So was I radicalised like that? Does that make any sense at all? And, if you think about radicalisation generally, let's point to sort of radical student movements. Peter Whittle wouldn't have done, but I did take part in a lot of demos during the mid-1980s. Apartheid, Section 28, those kind of things. Peter Whittle as a gay man didn't. Now, you might argue that we've simply gone down different trajectories, but Peter Whittle's argument, along with Mike, after all, agreeing once again, is that presumably I was indoctrinated in a way that Peter wasn't. And you'll often sort of find this with people, that they, especially with right-wing views, they're somehow immune, but other people are too stupid not to be. Right, okay, let's assume that their assumptions about students are correct, in that Blair, made 50% of young people at one stage go to university. Might explain the riots of 2010, but it sure as hell doesn't explain me, and it sure as hell doesn't explain 1968 Grosvenor Square and the Vietnam War demos at all. So, if you like, but anybody with a brain cell can go, well, hang on a second, that doesn't really add up. Anyway, you can watch the rest of this video because, of course, all of those Blair children have been radicalised, presumably by people like me, and they all think the same. And there's Mike and Peter sitting in a studio, all agreeing about everything. You know, Mike's standard interview technique is Yeah, that's as deep as it gets with any of them because they're all his mates, aren't they? It's the way things work. Now, let's leap across to the actual New Culture Forum themselves, whose surprise guest this week is your friendly, doesn't mind raping people, if he can be bothered, Carl Benjamin. Let's dive into that, shall we?
Special guest this week, Carl Benjamin, director of LotusEaters.com. Now, Carl, we've seen in recent weeks, and in fact in recent years, that corporate mega giants are increasingly using their immense financial power to try and bend people into shape. Ideologically, we've seen Nigel Farage get debanked, and fortunately we're now in a situation where Coots have egg on their face, NatWest has egg on its face, the BBC has egg on its face. Have you been encouraged by, do you regard this as a culture war victory for the right of sorts? If you do consider yourself on the right, I don't know if you do.
I would consider myself on the right. Yes, it is a victory, but it's not enough of a victory because there's a kind of mainstream liberal intelligentsia that is currently not accepting that they have taken this L. Emily Metis on the news podcast, I can't remember the exact name of it.
Emily who? Emily Maitlis?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, yes.
Yeah, Maitlis, sorry. And you've seen the clip going around where she's trying to rationalise, Nigel Farage has turned this into victimhood. It's like, well, no, he was the victim of a politically motivated deplatforming. And her, Alistair Campbell, people like that are refusing to accept that is what has happened, because if they accept that that's what's happened, then they have to admit that they are part of a power structure that has been abusing its power.
Yes, I would encourage you to watch the whole of that exchange. They do sort of go on about Nigel Farage being a victim and anti-establishment. It dresses itself up, the New Culture Forum there, as very intellectual, but one does have the feeling that those two younger guys are sat there having to put up with the right sort of working class oik. But think about where they are, right? Okay, I think it's extremely likely that those interviews are conducted at 55 Tufton Street, okay? The home of American oil libertarian money in the UK, and they are bemoaning minor podcasts from minor figures on the left. And those of us on the left wouldn't really be ranking Emily or Alistair, What War, Campbell, at all, would we? Yeah. As ever, whenever we're pointing fingers at the establishment, magically it's always really marginal figures, be it Gary Lineker and his football punditry, which apparently has a massive drag factor on the right. I don't know, you just can't really make this stuff up. And here we are once again, three blokes, albeit with a lot of talk of Rousseau and Paine and the rights of man and all the rest of it, but just sitting there agreeing with each other, and agreeing with each other about the pernicious effect of the establishment and money going into these things, and this, dreadful long-term march of the lefties, whilst seemingly being oblivious to what exactly is going on mere meters from where they're sitting. I don't know, we know these people just basically lie because it's convenient. Carl, in particular, is a fine example of audience capture. He's trapped in his audience. Those other two guys don't need to be there, but it sure as hell pays nicely. Yeah? Same with Peter Whittle. It pays nicely. And the more they get to go on each other's shows, you'll notice that Carl will invite Peter Whittle probably onto his show, and Peter Whittle will invite Mike Graham onto his show, and Mike will invite the rest of them. I'm reminded of 70s talk show hosts. Yeah, you used to get Tarbuck and Brucey and the rest of them, and you could tune in and on any weekend and they would all be interviewing each other on their individual shows. It was guaranteed. There was a group of them that just kind of switched chairs occasionally. It's exactly the same, and yet there they are magically complaining about young people coming up with the wrong things because they're not thinking through. Victims of groupthink. Anyway, rant over. Do have a lovely weekend. Stay dry. Yeah.